All right, everybody, welcome back to the Learning Out Loud podcast. I'm your host, Dustin William. I have my co-host with me, Whitestone.
I shall now attempt to show how the most important of these principia have been crystallized into the pithy form of maxims and have influenced and developed that grand system of truth known as equity jurisprudence.
The power is neutral. It's sitting in the quintessence until you invoke it. Everybody back to the Learning Out Loud podcast. I am your host, Dustin William, owner and producer over at True Life Productions. You can go over there at truelifeproduction.com and check out all of our content there, such as All Aboard, Article 3, articulations, and everything else I'm building, which it's a lot of stuff is changing right now, so I'm not going to say too much about it, but I got some cool things coming for you guys. But that's enough with the business for today. Let's introduce our co-host, Whitestone. How's it going, man?
Oh, I'm doing great. Looking forward to get into logic. It's a very deep and extended subject, but we're going to do what we can.
Yeah, but we probably should preface the episode with that because this is, I mean, logic is just, there's literally college courses just on the subject of logic that really, I mean, people spend, their the whole lives studying this subject and still, um, don't have the, the full understanding of it. It's been around for so long too. And you'd think we would have this stuff down more, but well, I guess if it wasn't taken out of our education system, we probably would have it down more by now. But I guess that's our job, so that's what we're here to do today is bring logic back to the people. Um, and yeah, I'm excited about it. This is such an interesting subject, and like we were saying, we're just really gonna scratch the surface on what logic really is, and we're really just gonna kind of break down the grammar of logic today to get everybody's palate wet into the subject. But before we do that, what I like to do on when we record on Sundays, I'm reading my Bible, so I like to bring things that stuck out to me today. And today, what stuck out to me was Matthew 27, 3 through 10. And this is part of my study of the redemption stories in the Bible that I've been studying, all 33 stories of them throughout the Bible. And this isn't actually part of the actual story that I was studying, which is Barbarous being the substitute, or they're substituting Jesus for Barbarous, I think is his name. But this is actually before that happens. Before Jesus is crucified, Judas, the person who betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, actually comes to the priests and the elders and gives them the money back and actually unalives himself. And this is just a very it's an interesting turn of events. And I think Whitestone will agree with me on this. Neither of us really totally understand what is going on here, but both of us feel that it's worth talking about just because it's such an interesting story.
Yeah, I
How do
think
you?
so. There's the surface meaning, and then there's some of the deeper meanings behind it. I think once you really start to dig into it, it really becomes a brain game.
Yeah,
But
so everybody listening at home, this is we're all gonna be, this is the Learning Out Loud podcast, so we're all gonna be learning out loud together here, and we're just gonna give our commentary. I'm gonna read these 7 verses verbatim into the record, and then we're gonna talk about them real quick before we jump into logic. So Matthew 27, 3 through 10. Then was Judas, which betrayed him, saw that he was condemned. He repented himself and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priest and elders, saying, I have sinned betraying the innocent blood. But they said, What is that to us? See thou to it. And when he had cast down the silver pieces into the temple, he departed and went and hanged himself. And the chief priest took the silver pieces and said, "It is not lawful for us to put them into the treasury because it is the price of blood." And they took counsel and bought with them a potter's field for the burial of strangers. Wherefore that field is called the field of blood until this day. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken of. Who was that? Jeremy the prophet.
Yeah, Jeremy the
Yeah,
prophet.
Jeremy the prophet saying, and they took him 30 pieces of silver, and then the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel valued, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord appointed me. And the thing that really set me off to this whole passage being so significant is verse 10 right there. And the Lord gave them the potter's field as the Lord appointed me. So they bought this potter's field, which is basically, as we understand, like that's a base where you bury. It's a place where you bury poor people because the clay has been depleted out of the soil. As I'm understanding that right, Whitestone.
Yeah, it's basically the potter's field is where those that don't have the means to provide for their own funeral expenses, the poor, the stricken, the destitute, the sick, when they die, basically, the church would just bury them in the potter's field for them. And
Hmm.
so that's kind of what that was. And I think there was even a reference to the prophecy of Zechariah, where the potter, who is actually molding a piece of clay, at his potter's wheel, had 30 pieces of silver thrown at him. So it's kind of a hint of things to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 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 this, yeah, wow, that's really just throws a whole nother
And
layer onto it
it's
because,
interesting. It's interesting as well because they call it the potter's field, and if you look up what is being described as the potter's field, it is a burial ground for the unknown. And it's just interesting that they make the reference to the potter who works with clay. And I don't know if this is maybe an offhand reference to um, maybe that human beings are molded out of the clay, that they were created in God's image.
yeah, it almost
Out of,
seems like a cyclical thing
yeah, out
that's,
of the earth. It's
yeah,
like, because,
yeah.
from the dust, you're basically going to go back to the dust.
Yeah, they depleted the clay out of the soil. That's the out of the definition I was reading. It's literally clay depleted soil. So yeah, it seems like they're putting the dead bodies on there to, I don't know, replenish the soil. Because as we know, that is kind of how a lot of the like sacrificial things started, is they realized on the battlefields the crops always grew better. So it almost seems like a death and rebirth cycle thing to me. Um,
Yeah. So
yeah,
in
unlike
that case, right there, the church truly is in charge of your salvation because they took your body, they put it back into the earth, and then created new life with it.
right, yeah, yeah, it may even go to like that deeper because I do believe the Bible goes on like those absolute deeper levels. There's some forms of thinking that say the Bible has like seven layers of meaning to it. And
Yeah.
the more I read it, the more I buy into that because something like this is like I said, I don't get it. I'm not gonna lie. I don't understand this right here, but I know what I'm looking at is probably very important.
Yeah. To
So,
me, if you just step back, I mean, logically, if you look at it, they're talking about the unknown and the stricken and the strangers and burying them in the earth, and they call it the potter's field. And then we know basically what potters work with is potters work with clay. So are we saying that after a period of time, that soil has been reinvigorated with clay because of the bodies, and then they can go in there and harvest the clay and use it again? Like I said, there could be a lot of references to a lot of different things here, but
yeah, it
um,
just seems very specific. It seems very specific
yeah,
to
and
me.
the fact that they can't put blood money into the treasury, so they've got to use it
Right.
for. And it's interesting, they can use blood money for public means, but they can't put it in the treasury where there's the divine and the spiritual.
Oh,
Um,
that is such an interesting point. I didn't even think about that.
they got blood money. They're like, well, we have this blood money, but we can't put it in the treasury, but We can do public works projects with it, like build a cemetery.
Yeah, put the blood money in the public.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so there's a whole other stream that you could go down there. It's like, okay, so blood money can only be used in the general and the public, and then you start thinking about, the public and the private and money, and is the public money, stuff that you don't want to use because it's got blood on it. There's a
Right.
whole, I think, I guess, string of thought that you could go down and start, um, you know, what I call wild speculation until you kind of hone in on it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And yeah, and that's all actually a part of logic right there. That is you grabbing the subject and the predicate of everything and trying to correlate these things. And actually, we're going to talk about some formulas of logic later. Um,
Yes.
which is yeah, it's something very exciting because people talk about logic like it's just this like ephemeral thing that like some people got it and some people don't, but that's just 100% not true. There's actually literal formulas of how to come to truth after you have the
Yep.
grammar of the subject, which is what we talked
Yep.
about last week.
Yeah, they are.
So,
No, they truly are formulas for thinking to arrive at,
mhm.
an irreducible truth.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely right. As long as you have the truth of the subjects and the predicates of everything, and you correlate all these things, and you have to have some knowledge, some foreknowledge, but that's why you do the grammar. And then
Yep.
once you have the foreknowledge, then you can bring it into logic and plug it into all these formulas and really get to the bottom of truth, which is real, because yeah, there is objective truth in this life, which some people don't believe. It's called solipsism, but it's just yeah, it's just nonsense. Um, but yeah, so that's really, I guess that's all I wanted to hit there. I did want to point out the whole commingling aspect of the thing is they are very um, adamant that that blood money does not go into the treasury, and
Well,
that is
so, oh no, sorry,
go
real
ahead.
quick. I wanted to just add on to that because it's almost like if there truly is the beneficiary relationship between the faithful and the church is holding on to all of the value, that and the people themselves value Christ and they value Jesus, then therefore they could not take money that was used to sell Jesus, to
Right.
basically throw him under the bus. They can't then take that money and put it into the accounts that are being benefited by the faithful. It's
Mm-hmm.
like I'm not going to have, if you're holding on to my money, don't deposit money into my account that's got blood on it, for destroying something that I love.
Oh, yeah, that's so interesting too, because this is in a very specific spot in the Bible too. This is
Yes.
right before Jesus is crucified. This is literally the story before Jesus is crucified. So that has to, yeah, that man,
Yeah. And
yeah.
that's crazy because it even says, in verse 9, then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel did value. And so the children of Israel are putting value on Jesus and putting value on his
Mm-hmm.
teachings. They love him.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, the church cannot take money that was used to sell him and put it into the treasury because I mean that just goes against, moral conscience.
Yep. Yep. And as we know, equity acts on the conscience for sure.
But anyway, no, I just wanted to point that out because like I said, you can using logic and using inductive and deductive reasoning in a lot of these passages truly can give you an insight into the world that you live because it's patterned everywhere. And so if you can pick up on these little things using these formulas, you can pretty much start to self-generate thinking and ripping things apart and coming to a level of understanding. So that I just wanted to kind of point that out.
No, yeah, that's perfect. Because I mean, if we really had the time to actually plug these verses into formulas, into these logical formulas, like if I had the time to do that, I really would do it. But they would take so long to
Yeah.
really plug these in, figure out the subject, the predicate, all of the pieces, correlate them together. But if we did that, I can you imagine the things we would be coming across in this amazing
Yeah.
book that was written for
We
us?
Believe it or not, we would actually traverse the last 2,000 years of human history and trying to understand this because that's how long people have been digging into this.
Yeah, I think about that. The more I read this book, I'm like, dude, this book is so old. And I've been looking into like a lot of the church history and stuff now. There's a guy named Bruce Gore. He goes through all the way from the first century all the way up to modern times. It's like a 50-part series.
Wow.
Um, yeah, but I've been listening to it. It's super interesting. And just the more you're like, dude, there's something about this book.
Yeah.
There's a reason it's been around 2,000 years and people have been fighting over it for so long.
Well, that's why it's
There's something
called the
about it.
Bible, because really the Bible just means not the book, but the book.
Right, the book. Yeah, that's what it
Yeah,
is.
there's
And
the
that's
book
yeah,
and then there's the book,
the book.
because
Yeah.
the book is a general category, but when you change it to the book, you're saying that this book is the pinnacle of books, which basically is king of the category. So,
Yeah.
I mean, truly, this book, using the trivium and the quadrivium, and also reading the Bible and keeping in mind equity maxims and principles, you got a lifetime of learning, direction and light coming out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that actually that gets me excited about what we're going to get into today. So let's start breaking into it. So let's learn about let's get the grammar of logic under us, and let's first look at the definition of logic, and this is the Merriam-Webster's definition of logic. So, number one, a science that deals with the principles and criteria of validity of inference and demonstration, the science of the formal principles of reasoning, a branch or variety of logic, or well, modal logic. Oh, I don't know why they used the defin or the word in the definition there, but number three, a branch of semi semantics. That might have been the formal
Yeah,
principle.
semantics.
Yeah. Sorry, these are my notes, guys, so there might be reading errors or spelling errors. The formal principles of a branch of knowledge. Um, a particular mode of reasoning viewed as valid or faulty. So yeah, that's the Merriam-Webster's definition of logic. And the number one definition is a science that deals with the principles and criteria of validity of inference and demonstration. So an inference is something that we're going to talk a lot about in the second hour. But before we get there, let's go to the etymology of logic. So this is first the etymology of logic, and it is from the mid 14th century, a branch of philosophy that treats of forms of thinking, the science of distinction of true from false reasoning, from Old French logique, from Latin logica, logic from Greek, um, which means in Greek the reasoning art, from is that must be the feminine of lokios, pertaining to speaking of or reasoning from logos, reason, ideal, word, formally also logique, sometimes formally plural as in ethics, but this is not usual, meaning logical argumentation is from circa the 1600s. Contemptuous logic, chopper, sophist, person who uses subtle distinction in argument is from 1846. Okay, so the I guess the way we actually use it is from around 1846. Logic chopper. I've never heard that term actually, but a sophist, that's basically what politicians are, is they're sophists, and that's
Yeah, and
basically
it's
so
interesting that that's from 1846, because
yeah,
that's teeing
very
up
interesting
for
time. Yeah.
the world. The world was kind of resetting or was in a transition zone with all the world's fairs and, language and
Mhm.
technology and everything being resetting. So it's no wonder that they're using the definition from the 1800s for logic.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um So yeah, so there, and then from there, I actually wanted to look up the etymology of logical, and so this is from the early 15th century, and this is based on reason according to the principles of logic. From logic, meaning pertaining to logic, attested from 1860 as follows: as a reasonable consequence, following as a reasonable consequence, related to logically, logical, positivum in reference to The ideas of Vienna Circle of Philosophers is from 1931. Okay.
Oh,
So we're getting
wow.
even more, yeah, we're getting even more recent.
Interesting. Well, if you look at that year, 1931, Vienna, Austria, kind of what was going on, those were a
Yeah.
lot of the masters of the universe were working, in those areas around that time. And
Yeah,
it's
dude.
interesting they use the word logical positivism because if I'm not mistaken, positivism is what do you call it actively reinforces like a self-supporting mythology or narrative, and so logical positivism to me would be, logical reasoning used in a way to reinforce whatever it is that they're coming up with in Vienna in 1930.
You're probably exactly right about that.
Because that's how they shape thinking. If they can shape the way that you use logic and they can control the definition of words, if it is truly a mathematical formula, then no matter what, whatever tools they give you are only going to fit in a one particular way, and it's going to lead you right to the understanding that they have already ordained for you. So that's
Yeah.
another way that logic can actually be used for nefarious purposes. And I mean, in the Trivium version that I'm reading, it does talk about how to pick out deception using logic for people who are using faulty reasoning.
Yeah. Yeah, well that's
Oh,
well in my opinion that would be more like breaking down their rhetoric in a logical way. And
oh,
because
okay,
that
yeah.
yeah,
Breaking down the rhetoric and seeing where the faulty reasoning started and where the deception
correct.
started and when they
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, because you can literally do that. Once you have, a little bit of information, you can literally correlate these things through these formulas that we're going to talk about in a little bit. And you can pick apart these politicians' arguments and figure out what is literally true and false, because that's literally their job. Like, I wish I would have looked up the definition of sophist and put it in here, because that is literally what a sophist is somebody who uses rhetoric to fool people. And
And
yeah,
casuistry,
and
casuistry.
yes, yes, and yeah, we love our casuistry. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And that actually, have you read that whole Lost Tools of Learning speech?
I did glance through it, but I didn't
Okay.
finish it.
She talks about casuistry in the speech. That's why I was
Oh, well, I
yeah.
mean, even in the Trivium, the one I say, it says, the study of fallacies is important for the aspiring logician, and examples will appear throughout the book. Let's see. But they are also wielded by unscrupulous orators to win disputes by nefarious means. Smart
Hmm.
logicians can quickly identify the fallacies fed to them every day by parents, politicians, pundits, advertisers, and teenagers, all those who may have a vested interest in their deception. So, logic can be used both ways, and understanding the way the formulas are laid out can, aid you in picking out truth and deception.
Yeah, I love it. Those who have a vested interest in your deception, because that is exactly what these actors that run the world do. But yeah, so yeah, yeah, that's great. That's yeah, exactly on point. So from there, I wanted to look up what the etymology of logos was, because I figured that was actually a little older, but it's actually from the 1580s. So the divine word, second person of the Christian Trinity, which is interesting, and that's going to be even more interesting in just a second. From the Greek logos, word, speech, statement, discourse, also a computation, account, also reason, judgment, understanding. From pi, logo. Suffixed from root leg to collect, gather. That's interesting from the suffix to collect or gather, with derivatives meaning to speak on notion of to pick out words. The Greek word was used by Neoplatonists in metaphysical and theological senses involving notions of both reason and word, and subsequently picked up by New Testament writers. That is so
Wow.
interesting.
It's interesting
Yes.
because, right, that was around, the time, because the Jesuits had really only been a thing for about 40 years because that was response
Yep.
to the Reformation, which
Yep.
was in that same century. And so
Y-
we're talking about logos, we're talking about logic, and the Jesuits get in there and be like, oh wait, hold on, we got to flip those words around. Hey, church, let us in real quick, we got work to do.
Yeah. Absolutely, dude. Absolutely. Yeah. And so it's yeah. Let's So the reason I'm excited to talk about this because this is something that I found when I was doing the research for Logic. It's something we were talking about before we jumped on the show today. I like to do a lot of research out of the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Because that edition, a guy named Richard Grove talks about this a lot. But that's where I found this edition of the encyclopedia, though. But this is like the last edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica before they really started like propagandizing everything. Which it and you'll like this, Whitestone. So it's the 11th edition. It was released in 1911, and it has 33 editions.
Ah,
Yeah. Don't you love
what?
that?
Why am I not surprised?
Right. Yeah. Shocker. Shocker. Yeah.
I am shocked. Shocked.
Mhm. Yeah. So, yeah, I thought you would like that. But so I was doing my research out of that. And the reason I'm so excited, I've been so excited as we've been going through all this biblical stuff and what we just read there is because as I was looking for logic in that edition of the encyclopedia, I found something called the Logia. So, and what that is a title used to describe a collection of sayings of Jesus Christ and therefore generally applied to the sayings of Jesus, discovered in Egypt by B.P. Grenfell and A.S. Hunt. I haven't done any research into those guys, but I bet they're very interesting. So the term
Wow.
saying, yeah, so isn't that interesting? So the
Almost like
term,
everything Jesus says is a logical formula to, divinity and salvation. Like there's a logical aspect to it, and the way that he speaks leads you there.
yeah, as we're gonna get into these. I actually haven't read them all. I wanted to hop on with you and actually get kind of a live feedback on this because I did find this so fascinating. And this is actually this is the word right before logic in the encyclopedia. So,
Mm.
um, yeah, so the term sayings of Jesus, it's apparently a controversial term and a misnomer. The collection being described in Greek name text, in a Greek name text I can't decipher. Nevertheless, stating that in the papyri, the terms the saying of Jesus is never actually used, but rather the introduction of the phrases being referred to start with Jesus says. At the same time, there are some scholars who claim that the term comes from a document which literally contained the sayings of Jesus, but in today's sense, it can most accurately be described as narratives of or concerning the Lord. If it is in fact based on a document that the claim is made here that it must then it must lie at the base of the synoptic gospels. Sorry, that's my little note there. So this is direct. I'm going to just read this verbatim into the record directly from the encyclopedia. So the sayings to which the term logic is generally applied consist of a papyrus leaf containing 7 or 8 sayings Jesus discovered in 18 sayings Jesus sayings of Jesus discovered in 1897. A second leaf containing 5 more sayings discovered in 1903, and 2 fragments of unknown gospels, the former published in 1903, the latter in 1907. All these were found amongst the great mass of papyri acquired Egyptian exploration the Egyptian Exploration Fund from the ruins of Oxy. You know what that is?
Someplace in Egypt.
Someplace in Egypt. Yeah, Oxyrhynchus is the best I can get, the closest I can get. One of the chief early Christian centers in Egypt, situated some 120 miles south of Cairo. So these were
Oh man,
found.
there's so much there. My brain is exploding.
Go ahead, let her rip if you got something
I
to say.
just so one, I think what they're pointing at is when people refer to the sayings of Jesus, there's one school of thought that says, well, that's just a general reference to all of the things Jesus said. There actually is no document called the sayings of Jesus where they're literally just everything Jesus said on there. And so that
Mhm.
was one of the distinctions that was trying to be made. It's like, is there a document that contains just the sayings of Jesus, or is the term the sayings of Jesus just reference the things that he said concerning the Lord? But
Mhm.
what's interesting is that
I don't, I'm always skeptical when they say, "Oh, hey, in this remote place in the middle of nowhere in the desert, in some basket, we found all these scrolls that give us a complete new understanding of, spirituality, of doctrine, or of whatever else."
Yeah,
And then on the Egypt thing, I may or may not be alone in this, but I'm of the mind that Egypt is not as old as we are told. Neither is Greece or neither
absolutely
is
not.
Rome.
No. Yep.
I've seen some work done that shows that the level of wear and tear, I guess you could call, on some of the Egyptian structures in early 1900s versus the early 2000s shows a degree of wear that makes it to where you can't have a 3,000-year-old society or a 3,000-year-old civilization, because early pictures from the 1900s of some of these Egyptian monuments contrasted with the same pictures in the early 2000s. It's like, well, if they degraded that much in 100 years, how have they been standing for 3,000 years?
Oh, absolutely. Who's that
And,
researcher? What's his name? That did the Sphinx. He did a bunch of research on the
oh,
water
I know
erosion.
there's Robert Bouval, and a couple other ones. I mean, the
Yeah.
thing is, without getting into a whole discussion on which parts of Egypt are old and which ones are new,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I truly think that Egypt is a mass conglomeration of different time periods, but I've also seen work that shows that inside a lot of these temples, or some of the ruins, some of them, some of the pillars are actually just bricks coated over with plaster, which may have been done when they were making, all of these old world structures in the 1800s,
Oh,
World's Fair
absolutely.
times, setting up the
Absolutely.
theater, setting up the stage, and then
Yep.
it's like, we're going to set up this stage in the 1900s, and then here in 100 years, we're going to magically find documents in our stage we set up, that kind of thing.
Oh man, maybe we should just start getting into that shit after the Trivium series here, because
It's just,
I've been wanting to do
yeah.
a lot of research into that.
And a lot of it
That'd
too
give
is,
me a
I
good
mean, we'd still
excuse
be
too.
using logic, because logic
Yeah.
truly is used to draw conclusions. And at the base
Absolutely.
of
Yeah.
everything, logic starts, you can look at it as an if then formula. I have a premise. It's like, if this premise is true, then this must be true. And by
Hmm.
using that and grafting it onto things, like I said, there's so many different subdivisions of logic that determine the rules of using the formula in that way. But absolutely, I think we could 100% rip Egypt apart. It would just take a minute.
Yeah, yeah, but we could do it. We could do it for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah, before we get too off into that, let's
Anyway,
stay
sorry.
on subject here. No, yeah, you're
It
good. You're
really,
good.
I think it is important because, you know, some of these subjects can be kind of hairy, but if you step back and look from a bird's eye view, you can see how this stuff is used, um, without getting too lost in the details.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 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 for sure. For sure. So let's actually start getting in to what are some of the sayings of Jesus here. So these are the Greek. This is from the encyclopedia still. And those are the 1897 ones. These are the ones from 1903. So, and then these are the translations of these first ones, right? Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So these are the translations here of the sayings of Jesus.
Were they found written in Greek?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. They were written in Greek. We're prefaced with the following documentary statement. These are the wonderful words which Jesus, the living Lord, speaks to, and Thomas, and he said unto them, everyone that hearken to these words shall never taste of death. You like that? So apparently, this is the introduction to these sayings that were found, and these words, which Jesus, the living, speak to, and then there's uh little thing that can't be translated there. And Thomas said unto them, everyone that hearken to these words shall never taste death. So let's read a couple of these. So the first saying here, Jesus saith, let not him who seek cease until he find, and when he finds, he shall be astonished. Astonished, he shall reach the kingdom, and having reached the kingdom, he shall rest, which I love that one. That's
That's pure
great, dude.
logic right there. Pure
Right.
logic.
Yeah, dude, it's awesome. Yeah, and these are called the Logia. That's literally the name they gave to these. So Jesus saith, Ye ask, who are those that draw us to the kingdom if the kingdom is in heaven? The fowls of the air and all beasts that are under the earth or upon the earth, and the fishes of the sea, these are all which draw you in the kingdom of heaven is within you, and whoever shall know himself shall find it. Strive therefore to know yourself, and ye shall be aware that ye are the Son of the Almighty Father, and ye shall know that ye are in the city of God, and ye are the city. So, yeah, that's one of Jesus's main teachings right there. Look within first. That should be where you're getting your answers. And then that's the second one. So this is the third one. Jesus saith, A man shall not hesitate to ask concerning his place in the kingdom. Ye shall know that many that are first shall be last, and that the first and that the last first, and they shall have eternal life.
That one, I always had questions about that one, about, they that are first shall be last, and the last first.
hmm I think that goes to like haste. And that's the way I interpret it anyways, because I'm a real haste makes waste kind of guy. So
True.
I see it as hasty people, though they're the first people, they're always getting their first in line, but they're missing a lot of their reward on the journey by going so fast and trying to get to the end. That's how I interpret it anyways.
Oh, I guess that makes sense. And those that are last, obviously, maybe have spent
Shall,
more time in the suffering and the learning and the trying. So, they once they
but at the
get
end of
there,
the journey, yeah, at the
yeah,
end of the journey, they've understood the subject on a much deeper level.
because it's almost by saying that both parties, the ones that are first and the ones that are last, are going to spend the same amount of time thinking and on the journey. So if you're first, it's like, well, you're a little early. You got to spend some time on the journey, so you're going to be last. But this guy that
hmm
came last, he just came from a journey, so therefore you both have the same amount of, I guess, time or, whatever it is on the journey.
Yeah. Yeah, that and I mean that's kind of how I've always interpreted that. That's one thing it actually gets me through the day sometimes. Um, so that was the third one. We'll just read a couple more of these. I just thought this was super interesting. So we'll read number f 4 and 5 here of the translations from 19 yeah, the sayings discovered in 19. Oh, so these are the ones from 1903 that were translated. So Jesus saith, Everything that is not before thy face, and that which is hidden from thee shall be revealed to thee. For there is nothing hidden which shall not be made manifest, nor buried which shall not be raised. Which, yeah, there's three. What's that? The old Buddhist tradition. There's three things that can't be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth.
Yeah, and I really, really like that one because you can't get any
hmm
truer than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely my view. Yeah, you can hide the truth for a little bit, but as we see right now, the events we're living through, I'm not sure if everybody's woken their eyes up or opened their
Yeah.
eyes yet, but
It's crazy because I mean you can't hide the sun, but they're sure trying spraying in front of it all day long.
yeah, yeah, they sure are. But and at the end of the day, I think they're gonna make these people are they can't prosper. And in my opinion, we're reaching a turning point right now because people are really turned off by what's going on in the world. Not that
Oh
we
yeah,
usually get into current events or anything, but I do think maybe it's just a lot people are just turned off, man. And that's actually the place we need to be. We don't need to
yep,
be angry and fighting and all that shit. We just need to be
no,
like, I'm over it. Okay,
yep.
you do you,
There
we'll
there
do us.
seems to be there seems to be a growing silence among people who are just silently exiting this circus show and just not taking part in it anymore and going back to what is real or trying to find out what is real. And I think you're
hmm
right. Yeah, people have reached a point where they're done.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hope that is it for everybody. I hope everybody is that because that's where we need to be. We just need to be done. Okay, this is fucked. It's time for us to rebuild and move on. you know? But that's enough
Yes.
about that. We don't need to get too into the fucking craziness that's going on in the world today. Just everybody get in your Bible, pray, and it's gonna be we can turn a completely new leaf. There's no reason for fear. There's no reason for any of that. Just lean on God and we're going to get through it. So, anyways, before we move on, I want to just read this last one in the record and then we can start talking about logic now that we're a half hour into the show. His disciples question him and say, "How should we fast and how shall we pray? And what commandment shall we keep?" Jesus saith, "Do not of truth, blessed be." Okay, I guess they couldn't translate that one. So that's the last one. We're going to read into the record.
I
But
think those ellipses, those three dots, everything that I have seen, everything that I've read, those three dots represent a group of text that's not included. And so they shorten it down to try to get to the main point, and they put those ellipses in there to show you that the original text was much longer, but for brevity's sake, they just insert those and just try to get the meat of what is being said without making it too long.
yeah, yeah, that could be very possible too. Yeah. Um, yeah, but yeah, I just thought those were that was just infinitely fascinating. I just found that right before I started diving into logic and stuff, and as we know, it connects right in, and I love that the what they gave to the sayings of Jesus, what the name they gave to him are the logia. So, unless you got anything you want to add to that, we can start diving into um, actually a little bit of pre-logic. You got anything you want to add?
No, let's do it. Let's do it. I think covering that kind of really put the crux on why logic is important because it is biblical also.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So where logic comes from is it comes from Plato and Aristotle. So logic arose. And this is out of the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica also. Logic arose, at least from the Western world, in the golden age of the Greek speculation, which culminated in Plato and Aristotle. There is an Indian logic, it is true, but its priority is more than disputable. It is what Aristotle it is with Aristotle that the bookish tradition begins to dominate the evolution of logic. The technical perfection of the analysis which he offers is, granted, the circle of presupposition within which it works so decisive that what precedes even Plato's logic is not unnaturally regarded as merely preliminary and subsidiary to it. What follows is inevitably, whether directly or indirectly, by sympathy or by antagonism, affected by Aristotelian tradition. So basically, what they're saying there is um, everything that comes before Plato's logic is basically just like a subsidiary to it. It's almost like the grammar part of it, I guess. And then everything that comes after logic that we know of logic today is based in Aristotelian tradition. Like it comes from Plato and Aristotle. So, and it touches on there's other types of logic too, but they're basically like the Indian logic, which I've never actually looked into that. Have you looked into the Indian like
No, I
Hindi
honestly I
logic?
did not even realize that there was another brand of logic.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a whole Hindi branch of like logical thinking. Oh,
Um, And I think it's important for people to understand this that logic is really the formulae for thinking, and from Aristotle again, and I've seen this before. I saw this years ago. Someone had said that all of our ideas about anything, about economics, about government, social structures, religions, and language, and everything else, are born out of the logic that was promulgated by um, Aristotle.
yeah, yeah. That's absolutely right. Yeah,
And so
and
basically, it's like, the way that we think, the bones and the programming, and I guess what you would call like the computer programming, the computer language that we think in was promulgated by Aristotle. So you gotta sometimes thinking outside the box means realizing that and looking at things a little bit differently. But that's pretty much what shaped much of our thinking.
Yeah, and what that tells you is that it's it's a natural way of doing it. Like nobody's added on to it since Aristotle. Like there's, we've refined a few things, but basically everything that we know comes from Aristotle. They just figured this thing out and they're like, "Oh, this is how humans think." And this is just it. There's nothing else to be discovered pretty much.
And
And
possibly turning language and thinking into a device to reach a very specific conclusion. Because I've even seen some work to be done that shows that the brand of logic that was promulgated by Aristotle was eventually to lead to the sort of technocratic positivism that we're seeing today, which is, the technocrats and the philosophers who have the most wisdom are going to guide humanity into this, new utopia. And they had to have a sort of formulaic language and thinking model in order to reach that, to shape people's minds, in order to reach a very specific set of conclusions, which was why that logic was formulated in the way that it was.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
anyway, it's just something to think about.
Yeah, no, yeah, we're actually gonna get into that next week when we get into rhetoric. Yeah, we're gonna break it down because like I guess from what I was reading, I can't even remember where I was reading this, but apparently like Socrates and stuff when they were teaching like the persuasive rhetoric and stuff, that's basically they weren't even really intending to teach people like to how to get to the bottom of truth and stuff. That's where like the whole persuasive rhetoric thing comes from. They're like, no, you can just be really good at arguing, and anybody can do this because we use this formula that we found in logic, and we all put this stuff together, and you can do it too. So yeah, it's yeah, just super interesting. Um, so but that's basically where logic comes from. So what was before Aristotle? Uh and what comes before Aristotle is, so I'm just gonna read logic needs, oh shoot, I didn't pull out what I wanted to. But basically, so what comes before logic is so there's this guy named Zeno. Okay. And he came up with these paradoxes. And so Zeno did not make one argument. He made several, each attacking motion from a different angle. Here are the three most important ones in plain terms. So what he did, basically Zeno, and actually Aristotle credits Zeno in one of his works. I have the citation here somewhere. I can't remember where, but Aristotle credits Zeno with inventing the dialectic. Okay. And the dialectic is what came before Aristotle's logic. So before Aristotle came around, there was this guy named Zeno, and he was coming up. There's these philosophers going around doing all this philosophizing stuff, and then Zeno comes in and he basically throws a wrench in the game, and he's talking about he comes with these paradoxes, and these three paradoxes. And so we'll just go through these real quick. Paradox one is the dichotomy. Yeah, the dichotomy. The argument: to walk across the room, you must first reach the halfway point. Before that, you must reach the quarter point. Before that, the eighth point. Before that, the 16th point. This regresses infinitely backwards before you even take a first step. Zeno's conclusion: you must complete an infinite number of tasks before motion can even begin. You can never finish an infinite series, therefore, motion cannot start. So obviously, these are ridiculous, but this is what dialectic was born out of. Is this Zeno guy coming in? These guys were philosophizing, and he's throwing in these paradoxes to break down their philosophies. So paradox two is Achilles and the tortoise. The setup: Achilles races a tortoise. He gives it a head start. Achilles is 10 times faster. The argument: by the time Achilles reaches where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved forward. By the time he reaches that point, it has moved again. This repeats infinitely. Zeno's conclusion: a faster object can never overtake a slower one that has a head start because catching up requires closing an infinite series of gaps. Motion, as we understand it, produces a logical impossibility. Now, this is the weakest of the arguments, in my opinion. But so we move on to paradox three. The arrow, the argument, at a single instant in time, a flying arrow occupies one fixed position in space. If it occupies one fixed position, it is at that instant at rest. Time is entirely composed of such instants. If the arrow is at rest every instance and all instants added together equal the total flight, then the arrow is always at rest. Zeno's conclusion: motion is never actually happening. What we call motion is just a series of frozen positions. The experience of movement is an illusion produced by our senses, not a logical reality. Which actually I kind of do agree with that.
You know
But
what? That very thinking and that very conclusion is mirrored in the Matrix when Neo is taken to the Oracle and there's those children that are waiting in the room to be seen, and there's the bald kid with the spoon, and he's bending the spoon and he's saying it's not the spoon that bends, only your mind. And
mm,
so, and that's really what Zeno is saying, is the experience of movement is an illusion produced by our senses, not a logical reality.
yeah, which I'll actually agree with him on this on this particular, because
It's
the
really
only thing that's
interesting
real
because
is the
some of
present
these,
moment.
I honestly, like even the Achilles and the tortoise, that's the tortoise and the hare story just
Hmm.
kind of retold, is that, in order to overtake the tortoise, he has to lap him, which is, lots of energy. And every time he laps him, it truly is just an infinite loop. Because if the tortoise is moving really slow, if you want to get ahead of the tortoise, you got to go around the track, and then you have to pass him again.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
Infinite number. It's
yeah.
interesting because on one hand, I don't technically disagree with what he's saying.
No,
Um,
that's the whole thing. That's why it's called a paradox, is because you can't actually disagree with what he's saying.
yeah,
So, because the logical argument is, yeah, these are true. He's not wrong about what he's saying, and that's why it's a paradox. Even though what we know in reality doesn't align with these arguments, what he's saying is factually true. And that's why, and this particular form of argumentation is what the dialectic comes from. So,
I
what is the
see.
yeah? So, what is the dialectic? And Aristotle does credit Aristotle or Zeno with the dialectic. So, what is the dialectic? Dialectic, originally a form of logical argumentation, but now a philosophical concept of evolution applied to diverse fields, including thought, nature, and philosophy. So, and this is from the online Encyclopedia Britannica, but among the classical Greek thinkers, the meaning of dialectic ranged from a technique of refutation and debate through a method of systematic evaluation of definition through a method of systematic evaluation of definition to the investigation and clarification of the relationships between specific and general concepts. From the time of the Stoic philosophers until the end of the European Middle Ages, dialectic was more or less closely identified with the discipline of formal logic. More recently, Immanuel Kant, as I like to call him, but Immanuel Kant, as he's more appropriately called, denoted by transcendental dialectic the endeavor of exposing the illusion involved in attempting to use categories and principles of the understanding beyond the bounds of phenomenon and possible experience. G.F.W. Hegel identified dialectic as the tendency of notion to pass over into its own negation as the result of conflict between its inherent contradictory aspects. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels adopted Hegel's definition and applied it to social and economic processes. Which I will just say before I let you butt in here, Whitestone. This is a the manipulation of the definition of logic was a purposeful manipulation by Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and maybe even Hegel. I'm just going to go ahead and put that on the record, because if you actually look into what, like, the history of dialectic and where all of this stuff comes from in like the modern day, people say it comes from Marx and Engels and Hegel, but that's actually not true at all. It actually comes from a guy named Friedrich Fichte. He's the one who coined the whole uh, proper reaction solution thing that we know of today. And then they manipulated it, they manipulated it into problem reaction solution. That's not actually what it meant in the beginning. They manipulated it into that. So, anyways,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think that what they did is they took logic and dialectic and they said, hey, we can use this as a device. And they started to reorient it towards their own ideology. Because, what was the guy's name? Zeno?
Yeah, Zeno. Yep.
So basically, they come forward with some of these foundational truths or paradoxes that really can't be refuted, but they do act either as a defense or a refutation of real logic. And somebody that doesn't know how to apply the tools will see them as identical. That, Marx is just being logical. They can see the logic that Aristotle promulgated, and they can see the logic that, Karl Marx and Engels and all these other communist writers are using, but they don't realize that what they're doing is they're using it as a tool to steer your mind away. They're taking something which technically is true, but they're using it in a deceptive way. You know,
Yeah, yeah. Yep, that's
like
exactly
the
right.
whole idea that it's the haves and the have-nots, and the only way, and this is where the dialectic in communism, or the Communist Manifesto always bothered me, is because basically what it does is it comes in with the assumption, and that's what they don't tell you, is they go in with assumptions and presumptions and then use logic based off of that, and they kind of hide it that way. And the assumption and presumption is that if you have anything, it was because you took it, you exploited it, and you stole it. It mentions
Hmm.
nothing of merit. And so that's kind of how they kind of use that and move forward to grab people's minds, because on one hand it does seem logical, but it's deceptive.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great point. Um, And yeah, we're actually gonna. I have some shows planned just on that subject actually, because I'm planning on writing a book on this whole thing and it too. So I'm gonna be doing a bunch of research into Marx and that whole thing and the dialect and all that stuff. So we'll get into that in the later episodes for sure. But before we do that, let's so that's where that so before there was logic, there was dialectic that came from Zeno. Aristotle credits Zeno with inventing the dialectic. So Aristotle comes around and he basically, I wouldn't say he invents logic because I think it's just a natural process of thinking because, if you really pay attention to how you operate throughout your day, this really is just a natural process of how you go
It's
about
very
things.
natural. Very
Yeah,
natural.
and they basically just codified the thing. They said, "Hey, this is how you do it. This is what we noticed, and this is how you do it."
I
So,
like the way you put that. Yeah, they basically took something natural and they put it into statutes where it looks like the real thing.
right, yeah, exactly, exactly, and that's why it can be manipulated, because they figured out these formulas, and then and it really only takes subtle manipulations to really throw you way, way off of what you're trying to accomplish. But that's why we're here to give you a little intellectual self-defense to combat that. So, and everybody knows who Aristotle is. I guess we don't really need to know. We don't really need to get into him. We're getting down to the last minutes here. So Aristotle's the one who came up with logic, and he's actually got this book, Aristotle's Categories, that where he gets deep into it. I actually didn't pull too much from that today because I was doing most of my research out of the encyclopedia. But Aristotle's the one who came up with formal logic. So, what is the definition of formal logic? Formal logic, the abstract study of propositions, statements, or assertively used sentences, and of deductive arguments. Formal logic, the abstract study of proposition statements, or assertively used sentences, and of deductive arguments, the discipline of abstract from the content of these elements, the structure of logical forms that they embody. The logician customarily uses a symbolic notation to express such structures clearly and unambiguously and to enable manipulations and tests of validity to be more easily applied. Although the following discussion freely employs the technical notation of modern symbolic logic, its symbols are introduced generally and with accompanying explanations so that the series and attentive general reader should be able to follow the development of ideas. So, and they're talking about in the online encyclopedia. That's where I got that particular definition of logic. And if you do want to do some reading on your own, that is a really good jumping off point to learn about logic. So that's what logic is in its most basic form. And that's what we're going to get into hour two. We're actually going to get into the introduction of logic. We're going to get into subject, predicate, copula, premise, proposition, contingent, categorical propositions, the syllogism. We're going to take a crash course in inference. All of this stuff builds off of everything that we just talked about in the first hour here. But before we get there, I do want to look at this for the last few minutes of the show here. This is something that Whitestone brought for us today. You want to explain this to us, Whitestone?
Sure, yeah. So basically, this is the medieval square of oppositions, and this is in my version of the Trivium here. And basically, well, I think we almost have to get into the different types of reasoning, I think, to understand this, because what we have are four different potentials on, whether or not something is true, and there's relationships between those potentials. And when drawn out as a shape diagrammatically, you can actually see like a pictorial representation between universal category and the particular category, something which is an affirmation and something which is a negation. So basically, we have general, specific, true, not true. And that's kind of the different and any combinations of those things between them. So on the graphic here, the first circle says all words are wise. That's one potential. And then to the right, we have another circle, which is connected. It says no words are wise. So either all of them are or all of them aren't. And those are at the top. And then at the bottom,
those are the universals.
Those are the universals. And then on the bottom, we have one, which are the particulars. Some words are wise. That's one potential. And then the fourth potential is some words are not wise. So basically, when comparing these potentials between one another, you can see if they contradict one another, if they affirm one another, if they negate one another. And you can also just take any, I don't know, probably logical dilemma that you're dealing with and plug them into any of these and come to a reasonable conclusion based on it. And it's interesting that it's called the medieval square of oppositions, because we're told that in medieval times, is either the Dark Ages, it was nothing but filth and raggedy clothes.
We were a bunch of window lickers going around. Yeah.
Bunch of window lickers. Whenever I think of the medieval time, I just think of that scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where the King Arthur is riding through where those peasants are, and he starts arguing with that peasant Dennis about, he's king, and Dennis is like, well, we're an anarcho, collective, that kind of thing. They're arguing back and forth. That's the picture I get of the medieval times. But here, what we're seeing is actually some high level formulaic thinking laid out diagrammatically to guide a person to truth. And so I don't think
just on that point, this is so high level that people today can't even understand what they're looking at. Like,
no, right. I mean, you can, yeah.
So we're told to think we're a bunch of window lickers back in the day, just fucking drooling all over shit. And here they have a literal diagram that tells you how to think. And like, people today,
about, computer language, the way that you get a particular, like an electrical input and turn it into a mechanical output. That's called logic controllers or logic control. I spent some time working on wind turbines, and a lot of them use, PLC language. Hopefully there's people out there that are much better versed in this. I mean, I technically did go to school for it, but basically PLC is a language in which you get certain inputs. If you have like an electrical input and you have a mechanical output, there has to be some medium language exchange in order to translate a certain amount of voltage coming in and make that turn a wheel. There's a computer programming where which is actually mirrored, believe it or not, in this medieval square of oppositions. So in the upper left-hand corner where it says all words are wise, the formula is right at the bottom. All S are P.
Yep.
So you can kind of write that out as a mathematical formula, and you can compare that to the next one. No words are wise. No S are P. And so basically you assign letters or numbers to a premise and to a conclusion, write them out formulaically, and then you can get a result out of it. And that's how a lot of PLC programming has worked. There's a very specific language by, instead of telling a computer, I need you to do this, take this and turn it into this, you ascribe numbers and values to those things, and the computer will mathematically translate that into some other output. So that's where, if you look at the outlay of cities, how they really are kind of lined out like a computer chip, and you look out how our thinking is lined out, they can also be formulaically lined out to achieve a similar result. So that's why understanding stuff like this, you can see how many other domains and how many other realms you can go into and start watching how things are clicking and working and moving just like a clock.
You can learn anything you want.
You can learn anything you want. Yeah, absolutely. And that's really where the mind is like a computer, where if you give it the information and you break it down to a simple formula using logic and reason, you can turn it into a result, which might be arriving at an irreducible truth or arriving at some sort of, reasoned conclusion. It's very, very powerful stuff.
Yeah, this is the most powerful stuff you will ever encounter in the world, because once you learn this, you only have to learn it once. Then you can learn anything you want.
Yes,
and you remember how you learned stuff, so it's going to help you on the next subject that you learn. You're going to learn, oh yeah, I got to do this first before I can even learn any of that stuff. So yeah.
And we'll get into, and hopefully we'll get into this, but a lot of times you can string those formulas together. It's like, well, if this is true, that must also mean this thing over here, which shares similar characteristics, must also be true to a similar degree. Therefore, it's in the same class. And if this thing and this thing are in the same class, now we can understand that they have a similar nature, they share similar characteristics, and they might be coming from the same source. And it's a very important research tool, too.
Yeah, it's one of the most invaluable research tools, and that's actually where we're going to get into a lot in the second hour. We're going to get, that's called inference, and we are going to get you're going to want to watch the video for this one, because there's going to be visual representations on the screen of how you can actually write these things down, because all the S and P up there, what logicians will do is they'll actually write it down on a piece of paper, and they'll write S above the subject and they'll write P above the predicate, so they can have a visual representation that can actually infer these things together. That's why it's called inference. So if you're interested, then you got to go to truelifeproduction.com, click on the Learning Out Loud podcast banner, or just go to learningoutloudpodcast.system.io, and you can click on the paid member section and sign up for a membership, get the second hour of this. I'm still figuring out how to get you guys all the extra stuff now, get you all the show notes and PDFs and all that stuff. But we are starting up a Telegram. That's probably how we'll do a lot of that stuff. So you guys can join the Telegram. And we're going to be, me and Whitestone both will be in there. He's going to be dropping stuff in there. I'm going to be dropping stuff in there. You guys can chat with us a little bit and check it all out. So go to the website, truelifeproduction.com, check it out, and never forget to seek truth and honor the Creator above all, and let that be the whole of the law.
That's the important thing here, is that everyone's word should be meant for a use.
And the words that I'm using today are meant to pull down idols within people's temples.
Meaning that I want to destroy
Falsities that they have idolized.
for their entire life.
And just pull those out and sweep them clean. And before that temple,
And get reinfested with a new lie. Give it true life.